What is the most Beatles song the Beatles ever Beatled? And by that, I don't mean what was the best song, what was the musically most advanced song, or what was the most popular song. My mission when scripting this video was to look at the complete canon of the Beatles' work and come up with a set of consistent criteria from which to say these things make a song Beatly, and then to try and find the one song that fits those criteria the most perfectly. In the process of making this video, I actually listened to the entire Beatles back catalogue, all 14 albums, past masters included, in order. And I came up with the following criteria by which to judge the inherent Beatliness of a song. First up, authorship. No disrespect at all to Ringo or to the mighty George Harrison, but because most of the Beatles songs were Lennon-McCartney compositions, I'm approaching this looking for the most common denominators between all their songs, so just on a percentages basis, I think it has to be one of their songs. And, for my money, it also has to be an actual co-write between the two of them, not one that McCartney wrote but credited Lennon for, or vice versa. Next up, we have musical style. To be the perfect Beatles song, it can't be too psychedelic, nor can it be too rock and roll pop. It needs to land somewhere in the middle of the road. It couldn't be the song I'm Down, which is a belting rock and roll banger, but only really represents one side of the Beatles. And it also couldn't be Tomorrow Never Knows, because again, that only really represents one other side of the Beatles. It needs to be somewhere in the middle. It also can't be some cheesy music hall thing from McCartney, nor can it be some mad avant-garde edgelord thing from Lennon. The Beatles' timeline can be very easily divided in two, stylistically, between the early pop rock and roll years and the later psychedelic and more experimental years, to the point that there are even two greatest hits albums underlying those two halves of their music career, the Red Album and the Blue Album. The most Beatly Beatles song can't be too red or too blue. It needs to be a song that could fit on either. Next up, we have a fairly scientific criteria. Song length. I went through every single Beatles album, I took the total running time of the album and divided it by the number of songs on each album to give the average song length for each one. And you can see those results on screen now. For the Red Album era, songs were, on average, between 2 minutes and 17 seconds and 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. They were very short, concise and sweet. For the Blue Album era, songs were longer, being between 2 minutes 46 seconds and 3 minutes 48 seconds on average. But if we want to get the exact average time, we need to add all those totals together and divide them by the number of albums, which is 14. And that gives us the exact average time of the exact average Beatles song released while the band were together. So, the most Beatly Beatles song should come in at approximately 2 minutes 46 seconds, give or take a little. With a tiny bit of wiggle room, that is the perfect length. Next up, number 4, the song also has to be in the most commonly used key by the Beatles, whatever that is. In another attempt to kind of do this scientifically, I went through every single track on every single officially released Beatles album, all 14 of them, and wrote down what, on balance, was the basic home key of that song. There are quite a lot of songs that contain key changes in them, but for the sake of this study, I just left the in-song key changes out and focused on what was the main one. Some of these didn't actually start in the main key and were a bit of a judgment call. Michelle and Happiness is a Warm Gun are good examples. Some albums like Yellow Submarine and Past Masters contain repeats of songs that are on other albums, so I've left those out. Unless it's a song like Get Back or Let It Be, where there really actually were two different distinct versions released. So on screen now you can see how many songs each album has, in my judgment, in each key. As you can see from the table, the most popular keys of Beatles songs are A, E and G. And, interestingly, the key of A is the only one to make an appearance on every single officially released Beatles album. So, whatever the most Beatly Beatles song is, it has to be in one of those three major keys. It has to be in either A, E or G. Now we need to look at the chords. Number 5, the most Beatley Beatles song has to have a Beatlesque chord sequence. But what does that mean? How do you define that? Well, there are 12 musical keys. Each of those keys has 7 basic chords. The Beatles frequently did something I call genre swapping, where they would take, say, chord 4 and flip it from being a major chord to a minor chord. Or they would do it the other way round. They would maybe take chord 2 and flip it from being a minor chord to a major chord. They would include what's called non-diatonic chords, meaning chords that do not belong in that key. So for example, if you're in the key of A, they might include a G. And finally, to be the ultimate quintessential Beatles song, all 4 Beatles need to be featured on the track. It can't be just an acoustic thing that just Paul plays or John. And so, now it's time for the grand reveal. I'm going to present my candidate for the most Beatley Beatles song the Beatles ever Beatled, and then I'm going to explain how it fulfills all those criteria. Interestingly, according to Spotify, no Beatles song comes in at 2 minutes 46. Roll Over Beethoven is 2 minutes 45, but that's a cover. Happiness is a Warm Gun comes in at 2 minutes 44, but stylistically, it's far too weird and avant-garde to be the ultimate quintessential Beatles song. Mother Nature's Son comes in at 2 minutes 48, but it's only got Paul on it, and it's not in one of the main keys. The song Because comes in at 2 minutes 45. It is in one of the top 3 keys, but it doesn't feature Ringo on it, and you can't have the definitive Beatles song without one of the Beatles actually on it. But there is one song that fulfills all these criteria, and that track is With a Little Help from My Friends, track 2 on Sgt. Pepper's. This song was a genuine collaborative co-write between Lennon and McCartney, so that is point 1 ticked. Number 2 is musical style. And in the musical style criteria, this song does land exactly where we need it to, middle of the road in every way. It's not an upbeat stomper like Revolution, nor is it an acoustic thing with strings like Yesterday. It's somewhere in between. It's got the whole band playing, we've got drums, we've got electric guitars, and, interestingly, it also has every single member of the band singing. So it's hard to get any more Beatley than that. All 4 of them playing their instruments and all 4 of them singing. This song occurs about as close to the middle as it's possible to get. It's a song that has clear elements of the earlier Beatles sound and also definite elements of the psychedelic. So it's right in the middle of that transition. It's right central. It is middle of the road in more ways than one. Next up, we have my attempt at the scientifically established average Beatles song length. As we have already seen, the perfect exact average length for a Beatles song is 2 minutes 46 seconds. Spotify lists this song at 2 minutes 44 seconds, but there actually is a tiny bit of wiggle room with that figure anyway, because how long the tracks actually are does vary a tiny bit on CD, on MP3, on Spotify, or if you sit down with the vinyl and run a stopwatch. Because the tracks have gaps between them, and some people count part of the gaps and some people don't, I think we can say, With a Little Help from My Friends is pretty much as close as it's possible to get to that ideal time. And now, let's look at point number 4. Was With a Little Help from My Friends in one of the most popular keys? Of course, it was. It was in one of the 3 keys that constituted over half of all Beatles songs, A, E and G. With a Little Help from My Friends is in E. Not counting things like the anthologies and the various releases after John Lennon's death, or the really random obscure stuff like the Christmas records. But now, let's look at point 5. Does With a Little Help from My Friends contain a Beatlesque chord sequence? Do we have genre-swapped chords? And do we have non-diatonic chords? Of course, we do. In the middle sections, we have an F-sharp major instead of an F-sharp minor. In the choruses, we have a D, which does not belong in this key. And in the intro and the outro, we have a C, which is another non-diatonic chord. So that is point 5, also ticked. And point 6 we have also already looked at. Did all the Beatles perform on this track? Yes, and not just that. all 4 of them played their instruments and all 4 of them sang. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you, with a little help from my friends, the most Beatley Beatles song the Beatles ever Beatled a Beatle on. A massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, and a big hello to all the latest sign-ups. If you would be interested in seeing some of the data from this video in more detail, specifically about the keys for every song on every album with notes and explanations, also the breakdowns of average song length on every album, that information is available as a downloadable document for any supporters on Patreon. The link is in the description. Let me know what your pick would be for the most Beatles song in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.